Germany, 1943. City streets, once full of life, are now covered in rubble, and over the ruins, thick smoke billows. The war has reached the very heart of the Reich. The Luftwaffe, once Germany's pride, is now fighting with all its might to hold the skies. German pilots, tired and worn out, realize their chances are getting smaller with each flight. Their planes are getting old, and the enemy is getting stronger. The old fighters can no longer handle the flood of Allied bombers. Day after day, the sky over Germany fills with the roar of engines and explosions, and factories turn to ash. It seemed impossible to stop this tide. In this moment of despair, an idea came up that might have seemed crazy: to build a plane with two engines, one that pulls and one that pushes. This approach was a real challenge to how things were usually done, but it was exactly what could give Germany a chance. And so the Do-335 file, or Arrow, was born. This wasn't just a new fighter plane. It was a huge step forward in technology, a machine that could break through bomber formations with incredible speed and power. Its main job was to be faster than everyone else, to fly in, strike and disappear before the escort could even react. The Luftwaffe leaders dreamed of a miracle weapon that could turn the tide of the war. They were looking for a way to stop the flood of steel and fire that was crashing down on Germany. In the darkest hours, they put their hopes on brilliant ideas and taking risks. For the first time in German propeller planes, the Do-335 had an ejection seat. This would save many lives because the pilot could leave the plane even at very high speeds. Another special thing about it was the emergency tail section release system. This let the pilot safely eject, even if the plane was damaged. But will these new ideas be enough to change the war? That's the question everyone was asking, from the engineers to the generals. Both the Germans and the Allies kept throwing new planes into the fight, hoping to get the upper hand. German aces like Hartmann and Barkhorn took to the skies in their FEW-190S and Bf-109S. These planes were a symbol of the Luftwaffe's power, but by 1943, they were becoming more and more vulnerable. Once they were considered the best of engineering, but time kept moving forward. The Allies weren't far behind. Their answer was the Spitfires, Thunderbolts, and of course the P-51 Mustangs. These planes weren't just fast and easy to fly. They could fly alongside bombers for really long distances, which was a huge step forward. The P-51 Mustang was a real disaster for the Luftwaffe. Now American bombers could fly all the way to Berlin with good protection, and German pilots were losing their last advantage. Just imagine how disappointed the German pilots were. The sky, where they used to be in charge, now belonged to new technology and brave experiments. At this point it became clear they needed a breakthrough, and that's exactly where the Do-335 comes in. Its job wasn't just to compete, but to be better than everyone else. This was supposed to be a revolution, not just a small change. The Dornier engineers dreamed of a heavy fighter that could fly as easily as a single-engine plane. After the first failures of the Luftwaffe in fighting off the massive Allied raids, the German command understood a new type of fighter was needed. The Do-335 wasn't just another plane, it was a true hunter of hunters. Its main targets were heavy bombers like the B-17 and the Lancaster, which were relentlessly approaching German cities. Attacking such planes with a regular fighter was almost suicide, but the File was a completely different beast. Its speed and power allowed it to do what others couldn't. The Do-335's armament was impressive. A 30mm cannon and two 20mm ones. Such a volley would literally tear a bomber apart in seconds. It wasn't just a fighter, it was flying artillery. But the designer's ambitions didn't stop there. The Do-335 was conceived as a multi-purpose platform. It was a scout, a night fighter, and even a training version. Only the best of the best were trusted to fly this plane. Not just aces, but the true elite of the Luftwaffe, those who could handle its insane speed and complex technology. The File became the Luftwaffe's silver bullet. But with that came immense responsibility on its wings. Could it bear that burden? The answer to that question isn't so simple. In the conditions of total war, even the most advanced machines face the harsh reality of the front lines. After the first steps in creating this unique airplane, a question comes up. Who was behind this bold project? Claudius Dornier. This name is well known to anyone who's looked into aviation history, even a little bit. Dornier wasn't just an engineer, He was a true pioneer, someone who always looked ahead and wasn't afraid to go against the grain. His journey started with giant metal planes, the famous seaplanes that made him known around the world. It was because of his experience working with metal and large machines that Dornier became a true legend in the aviation world. In 1942, when the German Air Ministry, the RLM, announced a competition for a fast bomber, Dornier saw it as a chance to make his long-held dream come true. But he went further. He was already thinking up the idea of a heavy fighter that could change the game. Dornier was sure that in future air battles, speed would be the deciding factor. He literally lived for this idea, looking over blueprints and talking about the details with engineers and test pilots. Of course, it wasn't an easy road. Red tape, doubts from his co-workers, constant arguments with officials, all of this came with the project right from the start. But Dornier didn't give up. He stood up for his idea at every meeting, convincing, arguing, proving his point. And then, when the situation on the front lines became really tough, fate seemed to play into his hands. The contract was changed, and the FILE project finally got the green light it had been waiting for. This was a chance he couldn't let slip away. Dornier gathered the best engineers around him, people who were truly passionate about their work. Together, they started working on a machine that was supposed to become the fastest propeller plane of its time. The responsibility he took on was truly huge. That's how the story of the Do-335 began. A machine that was supposed to change the course of the war. When it seems like technology is just zooming ahead, there's actually a lot of drama happening behind the scenes. The story of the Do-335 is a perfect example of this. After its first successes and big plans, which we talked about earlier, the project hit some unexpected roadblocks. Messerschmitt and Tanke, who were big names in German aviation, saw the Do-335 as a threat to what they were doing. They worried that money and workers would go to their competitor, and they weren't quiet about being unhappy. With all this fighting and red tape, only the support of the practical Erhard Milch saved the project from being shut down. His belief in new ideas and common sense made all the difference. Even the Luftwaffe pilots were a bit nervous about the Do-335. Its unusual design, the ejection seat, and the dangerous rear propeller, all of these things made them have doubts and fears. Dornier and his team had to prove the plane was safe and worked well through very tough tests. Every test was a step forward, and also a fight for the project's survival. But even when the plane was ready, the war had its own rules. Factories were bombed, parts had to be gathered from all over Germany, and production kept getting messed up. Getting things where they needed to go became a real nightmare. Moving parts, delays on the assembly lines, all of this slowed down how fast they could develop the plane. The FILE was in a race not just against the enemy but also against its own friends, and of course, against time. Every day of delay could mean the end of the project. To train the crews, a two-seater training version of the FILE was made. This helped pilots get ready faster and allowed new ideas to be used in combat units more quickly. So, even with all the problems, the Do-335 project kept going. But new challenges and new discoveries were waiting for the team, and we'll tell you about those in the next part. After the first successes and disappointments we talked about earlier, the Dornier team was on the brink of a new chapter. October 1943, the first flight of the Do-335. The plane took off, and it was clear. The speed was amazing, but serious problems were hiding behind this success. Right from the first tests, weaknesses showed up. The landing gear wasn't strong enough, the rear engine got too hot, and getting the pilot out in an emergency was super hard. Each of these problems needed to be fixed right away. The engineers worked day and night, literally. They made the landing gear stronger to handle the stress, and they added a huge air intake to cool the back engine. Sometimes the solution came out of nowhere. For example, one time during testing, a hatch accidentally broke off, and it helped fix a vibration problem. Luck played a part too, but it wasn't just the machines that were pushed to their limits, there weren't enough people either. Women and engineers from completely different fields worked in the factories. Every single person counted. Every successful flight felt like a small win, and every failure was a valuable lesson. Tests kept coming, one after another, and each time the team got stronger. The pressure on the engineers was huge. They not only had to fix mistakes, but also keep making the design better. The FILE became more perfect every day. During testing, it turned out that the unusual design with two engines in a line needed special balancing. Sometimes, engineers had to put weights right in the nose to get the perfect balance. To speed things up, blueprints were sent between departments using pneumatic tubes for the first time in the company's history. This new idea saved precious minutes and helped them react faster to problems. So, step by step, through mistakes, discoveries, and true engineering smarts, the Do-335 took shape. The results kept getting more impressive. And this was just the beginning. In the next chapter, we'll see how these efforts affected the future of the Pfeil and why it's considered one of the most unusual planes of World War II. At the heart of the Pfeil were two powerful Daimler-Benz engines. One pulled the plane forward, and the other pushed it from behind. This unusual setup wasn't just a quirky engineering choice, it helped get rid of common problems with two-engine planes, like uneven thrust and tricky handling if one engine failed. Because of this, the Do-335 handled almost like a single-engine plane, but it had the power and speed of a twin-engine one. This was a real breakthrough for its time. The Pfeil could go as fast as 763 kilometers per hour, which was faster than any Allied propeller fighter. Now let's talk about its weapons. It had one 30mm cannon and two 20mm cannons. That's a deadly combination that could tear apart an enemy bomber in seconds. But that's not all. The Do-335 could carry up to 1 ton of bombs without losing speed or agility. Its versatility was another one of its strong suits. Dornier's engineers put in a lot of advanced features. A tricycle landing gear for safe landings, a roomy cockpit for the pilot's comfort, an ejection seat, and even a detachable tail in case of an emergency. Safety was a big deal. The tail assembly protected the rear propeller during landing to avoid a disaster. The cockpit had an automatic oxygen regulator, which was super important for flying at high altitudes. The pilot could focus on their mission without getting sidetracked by the equipment. Another special feature was the propeller feathering system. If one engine quit, the propeller would go into a special position to reduce drag and keep the plane easy to control. All these new ideas made the Pfeil a complex but incredibly effective machine. It was a true engineering masterpiece, the peak of Dornier's skill. In the sky, the Do-335 was a true predator, fast, deadly, and hard to catch. Now let's take a look at how this amazing plane stacked up against its main rivals. Because only by comparing it to the best Allied fighters can we really see how big of a step forward the Pfeil was in engineering. Let's imagine an airfield at the end of the war. On one runway you have the Do-335 and right next to it, the famous Allied planes. Each of them was built because of a tough race in technology, but the Pfeil really stood out with its unusual shape and hidden power. Let's start with the American P-51 Mustang. This fighter became a symbol of the Allies' air power. It was fast, could turn well, and could fly long distances. But even it was slower than the Pfeil by about 40 miles per hour at top speed. Imagine, in the skies over Europe, the Do-335 could just fly away from anyone chasing it, using its amazing power. Of course, the Mustang was better at turning. In sharp turns and quick moves it was the best. But if it came down to a straight chase, the German plane easily pulled ahead, leaving the American one behind. And then there's the P-47 Thunderbolt, a real tank among fighters. It was super tough, could take a lot of hits, but it was slower than even the Mustang, let alone the Pfeil. Its machine guns were a nightmare for bombers, but against the Do-335's heavy cannons, they seemed small. They couldn't compare to the German weapons in terms of how much damage they could do, or how far they could shoot. Among British fighters, the Spitfire Mk16 really stands out. It was one of the fastest planes the RAF had, and it almost caught up to the Do-335 in speed, but when it came to firepower and how far it could fly, the Spitfire was still not as good. Also, at high speeds, the Spitfire became less stable, while the Do-335 on the other hand showed its full power. For long-distance attacks, the German plane was unmatched. It's important to know, the Pfeil wasn't made for dogfights. Its plan was to attack super fast, use its speed, and then get away quickly. This way of fighting was a new challenge for Allied pilots. As a bomber interceptor, the Do-335 was almost perfect. It could quickly catch up to and hit targets before their fighter escorts even reacted to the danger. It's no surprise that the Pfeil's features were already being compared not to propeller planes, but to the first jet fighters. It really was ahead of its time. Imagine if the Do-335 had shown up on the front lines earlier and in bigger numbers. Allied air forces could have faced a real disaster in the skies over Europe. Another interesting detail: even though it had two engines, the Do-335 needed less time to be serviced between flights than many single-engine Allied planes. This was thanks to its smart design and how easy it was to get to the main parts. But as often happens in history, the timing and circumstances of the war worked against it. The file remained an example of missed chances for German aviation, a plane that could have changed the course of the air war, but didn't get the chance. When the Allies first ran into the Do-335, it was a real shocker. After getting used to fighting German fighter planes, nobody expected to see a propeller plane that could just zoom away. It was that fast. Pilots in Mustangs and Tempests, who were used to ruling the skies, suddenly found themselves chasing after this plane. They tried to catch the mysterious plane with two propellers, but it was no use. The file got away easily, like it was invisible. Even the intelligence teams were confused. Early reports said it might be a new German jet plane. Nobody could believe that a regular propeller engine could go that fast. Soon, warnings spread across airfields. Don't try to chase this plane, you won't catch it. For the Allies, this was unheard of. For the first time, they were told directly that there was an enemy that was faster than them. The psychological impact was huge. Pilots talked about the new threat in their briefings, looked at photos, and tried to figure out how to deal with this never-before-seen enemy. For the first time, the Allies felt like they weren't in control of everything. The Allies' technical reports were full of arguments. The file's unusual engine setup raised questions about its weak spots. Some thought its complex design was a weakness, while others saw it as a big step forward. Instructions for identifying planes were updated quickly. On simulators and in training films, crews learned to tell the Do-335 apart from other planes. It became a special topic at every briefing. But even with all the worry, the Allies didn't get into a speed race. Their plan was to use their resources and time. They knew that to beat the file, they didn't need to chase it in the air, but to cut off its fuel and destroy its factories on the ground. Massive attacks on factories, airfields, and fuel depots began. They tried to destroy the file before it could even take off, stopping the threat right away. Meanwhile, the Allies sped up their own jet programs. The Gloucester Meteor and Bell P-59 were already being tested. The file was a threat that was respected and studied. But despite all its amazing technology, it couldn't change the outcome of the war. In the end, victory went to those who had more resources, planes, and fuel. The file went down in history as a symbol of bold engineering, but not as a weapon of victory. As the war was coming to an end, the fate of the Do-335 was already sealed. Even with all the engineers' hard work, this amazing plane barely made a dent in the fighting. Fewer than 40 planes were built, and not one of them changed how the war turned out. The reasons were clear. Factories were destroyed, there wasn't enough stuff, and it had to compete with new jet projects that seemed more promising for Germany. The file was too complicated and too expensive for a country whose economy was already falling apart. But even if the Do-335 had shown up on the front lines in 1943, it probably wouldn't have changed the war. But the Allies would have definitely felt more losses. In our next episodes, we'll tell you more about the legendary planes, tanks, ships, and giant weapons that were used in World War II. So subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to get a notification about our new series. Give this video a thumbs up and tell us in the comments what legendary machine you'd like us to talk about on our channel. And see you soon in our new episodes, friends. Bye.